Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you from here. I see you all. While we wait for our experts to sit down, let me give you a few words. So I'm Monique Calisti. I'm also involved with Martel, that I'm the CEO of in NexusForum. And I've been involved in several activities and initiatives at the European funded level in converging towards a digital sovereign Europe. What does that mean? We have heard many times about this. We want this notion to become more concrete. We know that there are several communities that work on this, and today we have several experts that will give us a little bit more of an insight on what European digital sovereignty or autonomy means. I guess that we are all engaged in some different ways on this front. There are for sure aspects that concern investments, but today here we're also, we want to hear and understand how we can contribute, and also how these different stakeholders, these different initiatives need to come together. So without any further ado, let me give you a little bit more detail, because I will have with me for the discussions these experts, and I would like to first of all give the floor to each of them to tell us a little bit more about who they are and how they are engaged from different fronts in the European digital sovereignty ambition. Erzsébet, I would give you the floor. Erzsébet, as you have heard, is the Executive Director of the SNSJU office. We have mics.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much for the very kind invitation and the opportunity to speak about digital sovereignty and what the Smart Networks and Services joint undertaking can contribute to the effort. Maybe just a few words about who we are and what we do. The Smart Networks and Services joint undertaking is a public-private partnership. We are a public-private partnership between the European Commission and the 6GIA as our private member, who are basically the main decision makers on key strategic issues in the context of our governing board. Our main mission is really related to the technological sovereignty of Europe, in particular with regard to 6G technology, so really developing through research and innovation the next generation of wireless technologies, as well as boosting 5G deployment, in particular with regard to 5G corridors, cross-border 5G corridors across or alongside transport pathways. What are our main tools? Our main tool is basically running an extensive research and innovation program where we have a 900 million euro Horizon Europe contribution from the public side, which is matched by also 900 million euros from the private side. So I think in a nutshell, without going into more details, this is our program with the ultimate objective of having 6G systems developed and at a pre-commercial stage by 2030. So if we look at then the digital sovereignty context, which is one of the key missions to deliver on for the SNSJU, we have defined in the context of Smart Networks and Services what technology sovereignty could mean, and for us the definition is for the EU to be able to independently develop, provide, protect, and retain critical technologies. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that this is all done in-house. It can be done either inside the EU or indeed in some critical technology areas where Europe is not let's say, the global leader through international cooperation, technology co-creation with like-minded countries. But of course, this objective leads to a lot of quite considerable challenges. And these are challenges with very practical considerations that then need to be solved in the program context in our case, but of course these are much broader, much larger challenges. Just to mention a few, which will, I think, resonate very, very broadly with the community. So, for example, the risk of depending on foreign technologies and vendors. Or, for example, balancing global interoperability with local sovereignty considerations, data localization, privacy considerations, nurturing and building, and I think that's a very urgent one for Europe, nurturing and building, identifying local talent and skills, cybersecurity and national security risks. Of course, a very, let's say, sovereignty-focused approach could lead to regulatory fragmentation. How to actually avoid such regulatory fragmentation whilst also addressing geopolitical tensions or risks. And throughout all these considerations, how to remain focused on competitiveness and innovation. So what do we do? And I will stop there because I think the other speakers have also a lot to contribute. So what do we do? So first of all, our objective is really to build European capabilities and European capacities, both in terms of technology, talent, supporting talented researchers, and infrastructure in 5G and 6G. And here we focus on first, with regard to 5G, to evolutionary research, then also with regard to more 6G, more revolutionary research, experimental infrastructures, and also large-scale trials with verticals. Fostering strategic alliances, so really, I think, building ecosystems throughout the consortia in our projects, but first and foremost, of course, bringing together the public side with the private side, meaning not only the EU, but also member states, meaning not only our private member, the 6GIA, but also a broader stakeholder group in our so-called stakeholders group. International cooperation with like-minded countries, and also facilitating participation in strategically important procedures such as global European and global standardization, for example. I will stop here.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Erzsébet. So now, please, Alex. Yes.
Yes, so thanks a lot. So from my side, I'm Alexandra Paul. I am working in PASQAL. So a few words about PASQAL. PASQAL is a grown-up startup that has 250 employees. We are headquartered in France, but we are operating across the 3 continents already, including in Canada and Korea, and in addition in Europe. Our main focus is to develop quantum processing computers. So from the hardware brick to the software one, so the full stack one, and also deliver some use case application for the industry and the government. So among the different suppliers and providers that we have a mix, but to the case study that we do with some of our clients, we have many of the 50 of the 500 fortunes globally. So among them, some like Thales, Crédit Agricole that you might know, even Johnson & Johnson are some of the clients with who we work on use case using our quantum processor that we developed in France for the moment that we produce, and that also where we develop and code the algorithm algorithm that they're on top on that to develop the use cases. What is important maybe just to mention is that sometimes quantum computing is seen as something in the future, but is already here today. And so that's an example I wanted to really bring to you. So the computers are already in function. They're already been delivered and sold to some important clients. Even in the context of the Euro HPC, for example, Undertaking, the 2 machines from PASQAL has been delivered in France and in Germany for their high performance center to be in an hybrid mode put with the quantum simulator. Other than that, what I can tell you more that is very important for us as a startup is that we have grown more than 140 million euro in venture capital already. So with one of the most important venture capital raise that were done last year for Europe for a company. So this is also, I think, a point that is important, and we are also involved in European projects equally, for example, in Horizon Europe, and having also at our capital investors, such as the European Investment Council and the European Investment Bank, among the private one, in addition to the private one. On digital sovereignty, what it means for us, so on a daily basis, from a practical way, is really to decrease our strategic dependencies for the key components that we use actually for building the infrastructure, our machines, and also on the software stack to also have the right capabilities to do that. So for instance, most of our components, the vast majority, more than 80%, are sourced in Europe, so either in France or in Europe. So for the rest that we cannot, for the moment, strategically source ourselves, what we do are 3 things. One of them, the most important one, is we really think carefully about different suppliers of some of the components that we need to assemble in our quantum processing units. So to diversify that, so we go a first approach that is European first. If we cannot, is EFTA second, and then if we cannot, no, we need to go broader in the world to make our machine operating. The second thing is really we actually try to develop partnership for developing the few components that they are critical for us in our machine that we cannot source in France and Europe, to get prepared if one day there is an issue with the security of supply. So that's the second thing that we really do. And the third one that is really important for us is really also to try to really acquire some of these companies that would be critical for us when we cannot develop that. So for instance, we had a key acquisition in a software algorithm from that was a Dutch company that we acquired, and they are part as PASQAL. So we try to do that. When we can do this acquisition in Europe, we do. If we need to go internationally, we also need to do it because we need to be able to make our machine functions. So this is really what we try on the digital sovereignty, what it means for us. And the second part that we also need to really make sure is that when we speak for us from, I would say, more a private side, to do also enable our business, so security of supply in our component, but in the key markets that basically we need to address. So we need to be aware that sometimes if we just address one market, for instance, Europe is the principal for us at the moment, but we also have to diversify to have other clients, other part of the world. If we have one day an issue, as you were mentioning, for example, in terms of regulatory fragmentation, this is for us something that might be a barrier for us to basically do and produce our QPUs, and therefore we need to ensure that we have also other center of production that can be developed, such as we have one in Canada as well, and one other in Korea. So this is very important for us as well, that diversification.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you. Now, Alice.
Bonjour, good morning everyone. So Alice Pannier, I joined in July the French Ministry of Economics and Finance Directorate for Enterprise, la DGE, and I'm in charge of cloud, HPC and quantum computing on the support for industry side of the French Ministry of Economics. So please bear in mind in the Q&A that I've only joined in July. Very happy to be here to talk about this topic of digital sovereignty, which, as we've heard so far already, probably has many different aspects to it or types of definition depending on the type of technology that we're talking about. And I think this morning I will probably say a word more on the cloud side of things, where I think the two main components of what we're trying to achieve in terms of digital technology would be first choice, giving the customers, whoever they are, whether they're companies, individuals, or institutions, choice of suppliers. And the second one, when we talk about the cloud, is obviously trust in data protection. The problem that we have now is, as we all know, the market shares of European cloud suppliers is quite low, and it's even going down as a whole, reaching a low point at 30% of the market shares. And so the key goal, if we want to have choice and trust in data protection, is to have more European cloud offers. So in order to do that, France, together with other, obviously, EU member states, has pursued two avenues. One is regulation and certification, so including pushing for pro-market competition laws at the EU level to help European companies to help them exist and grow. I don't know if this mic is working. I think the volume went down. Is that no? I think, okay, good, perfect. It works. And another one is certification for cyber and data protection certification. But the second aspect, which is what I focus on with my team, is the acceleration strategy. At the French level, the French cloud strategy was set up in 2021 with a key goal of using public support, i.e. Public money, to help clouders develop innovative services in France. So around 500 million euros have been dedicated to that strategy, to that part of the strategy, through calls for projects, to help product development as well as research and innovation. And these calls for projects are still, ongoing, and the goal is for the strategy also to keep up to date with technological developments. So, for example, at the moment we have an open call for projects on developing cloud services for AI, and other calls for projects have been on, Secnum Cloud offers, etc., etc. So we're trying to help bring offers that match also our ambitions for keeping up to date with technology and also protecting data. This is also done through European collaboration. I mean, the IPSA has been already mentioned several times. France has been a strong supporter of this initiative. It's part of the IPSA, and we can perhaps talk about it a bit later, but that's definitely another part. So, I mean, there is still a huge amount of challenges to reach a level of fair and equal competition in the cloud in Europe, but a lot of work is ongoing through public policy.
Thank you very much, Alice. We will come also to questions. We will make it a little bit more interactive, but now give the floor to Ignacio.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. Thanks for having me here. I'm excited to have this opportunity to share with you our view about sovereignty. Well, my name is Ignacio. I'm the CEO of OpenNebula Systems, and I'm the chair as well of the Cloud Edge Working Group in the European Alliance for Data, Edge, and Cloud, and we also play some leading roles in the IPSAI project. Well, let me start with some data. Well, I think you all know that EU players had 25% of the European cloud market in 2017. 25%. Now it's 10%. Market loss is huge. We will be 0% in 3-4 years unless we do something new, something different. And we strongly think that the solution here is to develop technology. Technology is critical, it's the main building block to run this sovereignty. We think that technology should bring this vendor neutrality, freedom of choice, portability across this cloud edge market. We think that that technology could level the playing field in the cloud market and will bring new opportunities and competitiveness and relevance to the cloud providers. We at OpenNebula, in the context of the IPSAI 6 and in collaboration with many other leading European cloud players, are developing a vendor-neutral layer across the cloud edge. This will bring two main benefits. From the demand perspective, users will be able to move to migrate their workloads across the cloud edge, including non-European providers, thank you, and on-prem. And from the supply perspective, they will mean that existing European players or new players will join this ecosystem, and we will be able to compete with the big tech companies and regain part of this market share. Another thing that we consider that is critical about sovereignty is related to the ownership and the control over the technology development. I think in this type of, of events, we always talk about this information about the market laws in cloud services. This is very important. But what about the building blocks of these cloud services? I mean, we consider that a cloud provider is European because it's under the control of a European company and it runs in Europe. But what about the technology they use? Let me give you one example. The acquisition of VMware by Broadcom. Okay, it was 1 year ago, and many European providers closed because they were not able to pay this rising in pricing that VMware demanded. This is a very big problem. So we think that it's extremely important to have the leadership and the sovereignty in the building blocks of the cloud infrastructure. This is what will enable the future of European sovereignty. Let me give you what is the one data about the state of this. There is some observatory, is the open source index that somehow defines, which are the top contributors to open source projects. If you go to the top 10 in April 2024, 8 of the 10 main players were in the US, 1 in China, and 1 in EU. Okay? And this one only had like a 4% of the contributions. So that means that we always think that Europe is quite strong in open source, but the reality is that the contributions of European companies, in this case is SAP, I have to say the name, is 4%. Okay? So this is something that is critical. We had to develop our own technology.
So thanks a lot. I just wanted to make a few points. So basically, I think you raised very important points. So essentially, there's aspects that, as we've heard, concern, the critical pillar for digital sovereignty, I think, are technological infrastructure and innovation, made in Europe, controlled by Europe, data governance, data control, digital skills and talent development. We know that there is a big gap. And finally, last but not least, also regulatory framework and international cooperation. Because the fact is that we cannot do it on our own. By now, there's a lot already of dependencies. And so to come back to a point that was made before, how can we ensure European players have the choice? And this goes back a little bit also to the point that Ignacio just made. We must master and be the ones behind the technology that we will use to build these infrastructures or platforms that will enable us to not be dependent anymore from the giant tech platforms. Some people, I think, many of us think how this will be possible. Will we be able to break these dependency strings that attach so much Europe to the US, for instance, but also to other market players from China? You mentioned open source as being one of the key ingredients. I would like to ask our panelists to comment a little bit on how do they see open source being instrumental. Open source here intended as open source software, open source hardware, open data. So it's not just software we're talking about. Yes, sure. I will ask to comment on this. Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I am big passionate about open source. I love open source. I think open source is a quite powerful tool for collaboration, for innovation. I think that open source is very good for, to compete in the market because allow companies to take the software, customize the software, and create differentiations, okay? And that's very good. But I think that we should do something different, okay? Because if we want to have an impact in the market, okay, we have to do something different. And anything we do should be aligned with the business models of the companies. So I think that after so many years, developing open source, being different open source initiatives, I strongly think that it's not only about technological cooperation, it's as well about business collaboration. For example, in the context of the IPSAI, we are developing or planning to develop an integrated architecture with the main building blocks to build cloud edge solutions. And we are also planning to have an open integration ecosystem with the different components from different companies. And the idea is to have like a certification process for the validation of different cloud edge configurations with the components being supported by the companies. So anything we do should be aligned with the business models of the companies. That is the way to have sustainability. It's not only having open source project with we all can contribute. I think it's about building an ecosystem of components with those components are owned or contributed by different companies, but at the same time they can play together. They can integrate nicely to go to the market.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So the public support, the French public support to the cloud ecosystems, for example, that I was mentioning earlier, whether it is through the IPSAI or other call for projects, including one on call for projects for office suites that was launched in France, I think last year, include some open source components within the requirements for the technology development. And we've seen some successes, for example, with scikit-learn, which is a library for AI development that was developed through the French public sector research in RIA, and now has been turned into, if you like, sort of startup to help maintain, build on, and diffuse the technology, which is, so it's called Probable AI. So we see some successes, and it's really part of our public policy objectives. That being said, it is not necessarily an end in itself, and it has, as was just said, to be part of a business model. It has to make sense for, especially for private sector actors. But also, in order to succeed, especially if we think European scale, you really need some buy-in from all the actors. If you have collaborative European projects with open source, that in the end, that the open source components are actually going to be reused, that there is going to be no duplication of similar open source projects that are being conducted in parallel. So I think it's definitely necessary. It's good. It lowers the barriers to enter a certain market, so it's really important. But it also has to be done in the right way, and it's not necessarily the by default for all the technologies that we try to develop.
So in PASQAL, as I was saying before, we also have the software algorithm that run on top of our hardware machine and to develop this use case. So we really have open source policy by design. So really on the software part, not on the hardware. This is really important to follow this, and we do. We have already a different library on open source that we have also ourselves developed to use for example, developing a quantum computer on analog or digital ways. So it's really something we foster and we follow, and we do as much as we can on that. But to echo what Ignacio was saying before as well, we need also to see the business reality. So there is also some parts sometimes that they are very strategic for us that we need to protect. And we are also patenting a lot, actually, of what we are trying to do. It's very important to us. So we need to find that balance between the two. Of course, that's very important. And the other thing we also try to do, so to protect our key assets, is also indeed to be very involved on something you were saying about standardization before as well. So at European or international level, to ensure that future standards in quantum programming and computing in hardware and software in the two elements are going to allow us to continue to develop in the market in Europe and also globally with standards that they are aligned as well.
Thank you. I think very much agreeing with the previous speakers. I think it's clear that open source is pivotal to foster a culture of technology cooperation. And really being very preoccupied in our program with the infrastructure side. Also, when it comes to infrastructure, openness is a quite important trend globally, as well as in Europe. But at the same time, I would also agree that there is a dilemma between open source versus the traditional standardization approach, in particular when it comes to telecoms infrastructure. And clearly both have advantages and have limitations. Now, what is the role of the SNSJU in the context of our projects? Our role is really to evaluate and then strike the right balance. So I think it's all about balance between the clear advantages of openness, whilst not creating considerable negative effects for the business opportunity, and also the technology performance, in particular looking at security, energy efficiency aspects. Having said that, there are several examples of SNS projects which are very active in the ETSI software development groups. In fact, there will be a dedicated event organized by ETSI, I think in November, to SNS and software development. And some of the key areas where these projects are looking and working on open source are network function virtualization, management and orchestration, open source operation support system for network as a service, and also developing open source API frameworks. These are all actually quite critical elements if we look at the Commission white paper on future infrastructure needs and the new technology trends. These are all, I think, actively contributing projects to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just quick, I would like then to ask a question before we go on. Otherwise, I think the audience is sort of, where's my coffee? About open source, I think a few points that have been touched are very important, sometimes controversial, in the sense that, of course, there's no common convergence on how to address some of the main challenges. But I think one point that was touched upon is very important, is the fact that we have to enforce a culture in which it's clear that open source doesn't mean for free. Open source must be related to the way in which companies, SMEs, big industry players can make business. Another point that was touched upon that is very important is sustainability of open source efforts. So while open source can be much more affordable, especially for smaller players, I have an SME, we're engaged in several open source activities, it's more affordable. But what is the dependency? How to guarantee that our business model is indeed not in danger when we embrace open source solutions and projects that need to become sustainable? I think there's several investments. There is growth in the culture, but the point that was touched by Ignacio in particular, I think, is very relevant. We have to create a stronger bond, or we have to make sure that open source represents, it's a strategic key business element for who's choosing open source as part of the strategy. And clearly, from all we have said, open source represents an important element of digital autonomy for Europe. One of the points that I would like to connect is, first of all, let me ask if there's any specific question to what we have said and heard now about open source. Anyone that wants to make a comment or ask a specific question? Yes, please. Yeah, we're not scared. Go ahead.
Because, of course, it's clear that technology is not sufficient, but as Ignacio said, we need to develop the technology. And then we look at who could actually develop the code, the open source code, and companies normally have really problem in finding young developers or finding developers in many sectors. Huh? So we have a limitation in Europe at the moment. So we are lacking software developers. No? So the provocative question is, can we instruct a European artificial intelligence to develop or to assist us to develop open source code according to some rules or some objectives in such a way that we can have, say, enough developers like the Indians, the Chinese, and the Americans. No? So we can somehow give more opportunities to the European companies for the next scoring.
Thank you for the question. I would have my answer, provocative as well, but I prefer to give the floor to the speakers. And who wants to pick up and comment on this?
I don't think this is specific for open source. No, it's software development. So you have a company running, and you are delivering a product, and you need developers. You have this problem as well. No, it's not itself because it's open source. And yeah, I think that fully agree that I think that this is extremely. I mean, AI is a way to support, no, to provide help in the development, to accelerate the development of the software, and we should use that type of tools. But you know, the problem you share, I think it's common to the industry. It's true that we don't have, you know, computer engineers. I mean, we have those problems. I mean, for example, in our case with the IPSI, we are scaling up, and we need to hire, you know, people, and we are not able to find people able to develop code, you know, do DevOps, even in AI. And so we have a real need of having more engineers in the market. But yeah.
I think if we're talking open source, by definition, we're talking borderless unless you're talking China, where there is some control over the platforms. And so looking at the companies that contribute to open source is one way of looking at it, as was said with SAP, first European company contributing to open source. But if you look at individuals, then the picture is a bit different. Then you have more like 20 or 30% of European individuals contributing. But by definition, maybe European contributors will contribute to American code, and maybe Americans or Indians will contribute to European code, and you can't trace that because there is no identity card attached to contributors. So, I mean, there is this big question of, can we do European open source? Because that would be nice, right? We would just work among ourselves to help European sovereignty. Honestly, I don't know. We haven't managed to square that circle yet.
Yes, this is a very good point. No? And I think that when you compare different open source projects, it's not only that the development is in public, it's not only the license, it's the governance model, as you said. So there are many European companies contributing, you know, to open source project with governance that, you know, is controlled by US companies. And that is, as you said, a very big problem. So I don't know, that can be considered real, you know, European open source. What is the definition of European open source? But this is a big problem. I mean, we have to have our own open source project, you know, with the governance controlled by European companies, because if not, we have the same problem. I know there are many people using, I don't know, whatever software stack, and if the control of the roadmap, okay, main funding is provided by US companies, if they decide to stop the development, you have a very problem here, okay? So this is a very good, you know, I think, debate, no? What is, how do we define, no, European open source?
Thank you very much. Maybe we can use this mic also in case, if you guys want to add anything. Well, I think we touched upon very important points. There's also a lot of discussions within the open source community on how to bring open source also in master courses, so to bring education of open source, on how to contribute to open source in schools, in graduate and postgraduate studies, which is an important part. But also, as mentioned before, we need to make sure that there is a way to govern and control the use, not only the development, but also the use of the open source components that are chosen. Now I would like to touch upon, sorry, I'm getting up because I have the impression that you cannot see Ignacio and he cannot see you, so I'm getting up and down. I hope, thank you. Thank you very much. We touched upon SMEs, and some of you already mentioned how important it is to engage SMEs that represent a very important part of the market players in Europe. Because for SMEs it's difficult sometimes to afford changes, to afford embracing new policies of regulation. GDPR was a very, very costly move for many of small players. Now, if we want to push forward the digital autonomy, and we are asking European stakeholders, in particular small players, to embrace new models, new regulatory efforts, to develop new talents, how can we make sure that these will be affordable? How can we include smaller players into the race towards digital autonomy? And I would start with Erzsébet.
Okay, thank you. In an SNS context, it's a very clear objective for us to facilitate that SMEs have access to technology, they have access to EU funding, and that they can become part of the relevant ecosystems, which are all challenges. And this really translates into a very tangible performance indicator for the SNSJU. So we have a KPI which clearly states that we have to have 20% SME participation in our program. We are about midway in our program, but I think we are quite proud to say that so far we have approximately 26% of our beneficiaries as SMEs, and approximately 24% of the direct funding that was provided by the SNSJU has gone to SMEs. Now, there is an additional tool, which I think is a relatively novel funding tool, the so-called cascade funding, when actually larger projects can open calls, and then they are better placed to actually know which are the local SMEs who could provide niche technologies or participate in research. This 24% that I have mentioned does not include the cascade funding that has gone to SMEs. So we are very active on this front.
Thank you. I urge to be concise on this question, on this answer, because we have 5 minutes left overall, and I would like also to ask for another question.
Okay, so I, as a startup, but we are still, we are also leader in quantum and based on neutral atom technology. So we are involved in some of the European projects, as I was saying, the Pathfinders in particular. So it's rather linked to also what the European Innovation Council is doing. What's happened today is maybe to say something maybe a bit also provocative there, is not only access for SMEs, but that SMEs sometimes are at the core of developing these technologies, especially in some field for sovereignty. So sometimes what we see from this side as well, for instance, so we are playing, you know, not only to be 20% in the funding, but we want to be, you know, the one getting as a leader in consortia some of this financing, but also in terms of public procurement. So what we can see, is, especially in terms of public procurement at the moment, is that sometimes they are very, very lengthy in process, I have to say it, and we get as SME to try to compete in the framework that they are very short, 35 days, you know, some time to respond to this. and we do it, but then we get, for instance, we were speaking about sovereignty, the ultimate owners, for example, of the finance that we are getting from private owners, that we need to justify, that sometimes is very difficult, and is really taking a lot of our time, while some of that task, could be maybe done by, for example, the Commission or others. So if I am asked who is the ultimate owner of the Banque Publique d'Investissement in France, I think this is something that could be, outsourced to others to help us really to be able to respond to these calls and be able really to then be able to respond to the responses that they are provided. So maybe on that aspect there is something that could be improved. And my second point is also for us from the SME side, we want to have access to the results. We want to be part of this community, but sometimes as well, of course, as I was saying, we try to expand. So we don't have always the time to go and to look at all the new results or all the project that has been done and how this could be helpful for us. So maybe food for thought is how we can have kind of a type of mentorship programs, for some startups that we've seen that they are already best in class and they need to grow, that is more targeted. So not just, if I can say, this result has been developed, but no, I mean, you are working on your quantum business, for example, you develop this software brick now, this is what we see that could be interesting to us, let's discuss about it. And just, sorry, the last point, what is very important we see missing for us is also on the venture capital side. And I'm sorry because I really need to say it with the Capital Market Union, so it's good, but now we need to accelerate. It's great that we can have kind of some network of investors that will be built, as one of the announcements of the President of the Commission recently, but we need to have the supply side. So is also to us, to reach out also to us, because this is immense work, when you try to scale up and you want to also protect your strategic asset and be, as you said, digital sovereign, you need to have this investment, and we cannot do it alone, basically.
Thank you very much, Alexandra.
I'll be really quick because much has been said already, and indeed, if I think SME, from my point of view, I'm thinking tech SMEs, and so we ask for the consortia that respond to our call for projects to always include at least one SME, so we're trying to make sure that they are part of the lively French ecosystem. At the same time, we are conscious of the challenges that SMEs face when filing those responses to calls for projects. For public funding, it's very lengthy, it's obviously uncertain, and they don't have the same HR means to spend time on those. Trying to help as much inform about the best practices, for example, to help them succeed in their applications.
Thank you, Alice.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm going to be short as well. The thing is that I think it's very good to have open source projects, open ecosystems. That's great, but this is only a first step. I think that we have to invest in the delivery of these technologies. Let me give you one example, use cases, okay? We have hundreds of use cases from many European projects that, covering the application of cloud edge to different industries. That's great. In the projects, we analyze the use case, we define the requirements, we do very nice demos. But that's it, those are just outputs. The thing is that the projects should provide a way to replicate the use case. So other companies in the same industry, on other industries, should go there and would be able to replicate the use case. That means a real transfer of the skills, of the knowledge being defined, developed in the project, and should provide a way to continue the research done in the project. I think that is the real outcome. This is the real value that should be provided by the projects. This way to transfer the real, it's like the important thing is not the technology itself, it's more the solution, and bring that solution to the market so different companies can make use of that.
Thank you very much. So I think we reached the end. I'm sorry we could not involve more the audience, but please feel free to ask our experts during the breaks. What I think as a conclusion of this discussion, it's very important is to say that definitely digital sovereignty is a multifaceted challenge that must engage different players and must require lots of investments on several fronts: infrastructure, technology, talents, and you name it, regulation, standardization. But I think what is at stake here, and I would like that we all bring back this point, is not only financial and let's say market competitiveness. It's about protecting the citizens. It's about protecting our society, making sure that the European citizens will continue benefiting from the values that are very unique and dear to our society. So I think the commitment to digital sovereignty goes much more beyond digital and goes much more beyond technologies. So thanks a lot to all of you, and the floor is back to you. Thank you
very much.
Close, please.